Please, close your eyes just for a moment. Can you smell the intoxicating scent of sweet basil and blooming jasmine drifting from a terracotta pot on a warm summer evening? Can you hear the rhythmic, deafening song of the cicadas mixed with the distant sound of children laughing in a dusty street? Open your eyes. Today, we are traveling back, deep into the heart of 1970s and 80s Greece. We are going to explore 40 completely normal habits and daily rituals from our youth that kids today would find absolutely absurd or even impossible to understand. From the chaotic way we watch television to the simple games that left our knees permanently bruised, we will remember it all. And make sure you stay until the very end, because the final memory we will share, the incredibly touching, slow way we used to say hello and goodbye to the people we loved the most, without any screens, will surely bring a beautiful, melancholic tear to your eye. Before we dive into these long-forgotten habits, we must understand the world as it was back then. In the 1960s, 70s and 80s, time simply flowed differently. It was a slower, heavier kind of time, completely devoid of the relentless, frantic rushing that defines the modern era. Today, we are constantly connected to invisible networks, yet we have never felt more isolated. Many younger people wrongly believe that because we lacked smart devices, instant delivery, and endless digital entertainment, our lives must have been empty or emotionally poor. But you and I know the exact opposite is true. Our lives were incredibly rich because every interaction was tangible, deliberate, and fiercely genuine. When we waited for a letter, the waiting itself was an act of love. When we gathered on a balcony, we shared our true selves, not curated images. We lived in a physical world where you could smell the changing of the seasons, hear the heartbeat of your neighborhood, and feel the weight of a coin in your pocket. We are not just exploring old objects today, we are stepping back into an era where sincerity was our greatest wealth and human connection was the only technology we ever truly needed. Let us begin with a ritual that transformed our neighborhoods every single afternoon, a habit that today might seem like a strange waste of water, but back then was a sacred duty. Do you remember the sound of the garden hose unspooling, followed by the aggressive swoosh of water hitting the hot pavement? Every afternoon, as the intense summer heat began to break, the women of the neighborhood would step out onto their balconies and sidewalks. Armed with long brooms and rubber hoses, they would meticulously wash away the dust of the day. The water would cascade down the concrete, creating a mini river in the gutters, carrying away fallen leaves and dirt. But it was not just about cleanliness. The evaporation of the cool water off the sun-baked cement released a distinct earthy smell, bringing a sudden, refreshing drop in temperature to the stifling city air. This was the moment the neighborhood exhaled. As the women swept, they would lean over the metal railings, exchanging news, recipes, and innocent gossip with the neighbor next door, or the one washing her own balcony across the narrow street. The rhythmic splashing of water and the scratch of the stiff broom bristles against the concrete formed the soothing soundtrack of our late afternoons. It was a communal reset button, preparing the street for the evening cool, setting the stage for families to drag their folding chairs outside and sit under the dim streetlights. Let us think about the neighborhood kiosk, the beloved periptero. Today, a kiosk is just a place to quickly grab a bottle of water, but in the 1970s, it was the beating heart of our community. For many households that did not yet have a private landline, the periptero was our connection to the outside world. Do you remember standing on the dusty pavement, clutching a few drachmas, waiting to use the heavy red public telephone equipped with a coin slot? The kiosk owner, sitting inside his tiny yellow box surrounded by hanging newspapers and magazines, was the keeper of all local secrets. He would take messages for neighbors and shout across the street when someone had a long-distance phone call from relatives in Germany or Australia. We would buy things that seem completely absurd to kids today, like single, loose cigarettes, because we could not afford a whole pack, or tiny paper cones filled with roasted chickpeas. The periptero was a beacon of light in the evening, illuminating the street corner with its warm glow. It was a place where generations intersected, where the elderly bought their daily newspaper and we children bought our cheap chocolate treats or collected chewing gum with stickers. The kiosk owner knew everyone by their first name, knew who was struggling and who was celebrating. It was not a shop, it was the neighborhood's pulse. Now let us remember the sacred, unbreakable rule of the afternoon siesta, the famous Mesimerianos Hypnos. Between the hours of 3 and 5 in the afternoon, during the blazing summer months, the entire country came to a complete, glorious standstill. The heavy wooden shutters of every house were pulled shut, plunging the rooms into a cool, striped darkness. Today, children are constantly entertained, but back then we were given strict orders to be absolutely quiet so our parents and grandparents could sleep. Walking down the street, you would not hear a single car engine, only the deafening, rhythmic buzzing of the cicadas in the pine trees. If you dared to bounce a ball on the sidewalk or shout to a friend during these holy hours, a neighbor would immediately throw open their shutters and scold you in hushed but furious whispers. We would lie on our beds in the dim light, staring at the dust motes dancing in the thin beams of sunlight that pierced through the wooden slats, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Sometimes we would sneak out with bare feet, trying not to let the floorboards creak, just to sit on the cool mosaic floor of the balcony. It was an enforced period of rest that taught us how to be alone with our thoughts, how to respect the quiet, and how to appreciate the slow, heavy stillness of a summer afternoon. We cannot talk about our youth without mentioning the Alana, those empty, unpaved dirt lots scattered between the newly built apartment buildings. Today, children play in structured, cushioned playgrounds under the watchful eyes of their parents. But our playground was a rough patch of earth, weeds and broken stones. We would rush out of the house after school, wearing cheap canvas shoes, and claim the Alana as our kingdom until the sun went down. There were no adults organizing our games. We made our own rules. We played endless games of makeshift football, using 2 rocks as goalposts, raising clouds of dust that coated our sweaty faces and legs. We played hide and seek among the abandoned construction materials, and we fell so many times. Our knees were permanently scraped, painted with red mercurochrome that stung like fire when our mothers applied it. But we never cried for long. We just wiped away the tears and ran back into the dust. We learnt negotiation, conflict resolution, and teamwork in those dirt lots. We knew it was time to go home, not because someone called our mobile phones, but because the yellow streetlights flickered on, or because we heard our mothers shouting our names from the balconies above. The Alana was our world, a place of total freedom that no longer exists. Let us journey back to a sound that used to echo through our streets on hot summer mornings, the deep voice of the Iceman calling out his arrival. Long before every kitchen had a humming, frosty electric refrigerator, we relied on the wooden icebox, the pagiera, and to keep our food from spoiling, we depended on the pagazzis. Do you remember the heavy, wet burlap sacks he used to carry the massive, crystalline blocks of ice on his shoulders? He drove a slow-moving truck or a 3-wheeled cart, and as soon as we heard his voice, we would run out with a few coins. We children would stand around the back of his cart, watching in absolute fascination as he used an iron pick to expertly chip away pieces of the giant frozen blocks. And oh, the joy of catching a tiny shard of flying ice to suck on. It felt like the greatest treat on a sweltering July day. Our mothers would rub the ice in a clean cloth and place it carefully in the top compartment of the wooden icebox, where it would slowly melt over 2 days, the water dripping into a metal pan underneath. It was an incredibly inefficient way to keep a few slices of cheese, some tomatoes, and a bottle of water cold, but the taste of that chilled water, slightly tasting of wood and melting frost, is something a modern refrigerator simply cannot reproduce. And what about the deeply ingrained ritual of the Sunday family lunch? Today, Sundays can feel like just another day of rushing around or ordering food from a phone screen. But in 1970s Greece, Sunday was a sacred institution built around the dining table. The preparations began early in the morning. The entire house would slowly fill with the rich, intoxicating aroma of onions frying in olive oil, tomato paste, and cinnamon. It was usually coquinisto, tender chunks of beef slowly braising in a red sauce, served over a mountain of pasta and generously topped with grated salty cheese. Or perhaps it was roasted lamb with potatoes, heavily seasoned with lemon and oregano, returning from the neighborhood bakery where it had been sent to cook in their massive wood-fired ovens. Everyone had to be present. The table was set with a white, heavily starched tablecloth that was kept only for good occasions. We ate slowly, breaking crusty bread to dip into the rich, oily sauces left on our plates. After the meal, no one rushed to leave. We sat for hours peeling apples and oranges with small knives, the adults drinking strong Greek coffee, discussing politics, laughing, and sometimes arguing passionately. That table was not just about nourishment, it was the anchor of our family, tying us together week after week. Let us shift our focus to the way we experienced music, a process that required immense patience and dedication, something entirely alien to the era of instant streaming. If you wanted to hear your favorite song in the 1970s and 80s, you had to hunt for it. We all had those bulky rectangular cassette recorders, with the heavy plastic buttons that made a loud, satisfying click when pressed. We would sit by the radio for hours, our fingers hovering anxiously over the record and play buttons, waiting for the radio announcer to introduce a song we loved. The adrenaline rush of pressing those buttons at the exact right millisecond was unmatched. But oh, the frustration when the radio host decided to talk over the beautiful guitar solo at the end of the track. We made mixtapes by carefully recording one song at a time, a labor of love that took days to complete. We would write the track lists by hand on the tiny cardboard insets using different colored pens, and when the thin brown magnetic tape got chewed up by the machine, we would gently pull it out and patiently wind it back into the plastic casing using a simple wooden pencil. Music was not background noise for us. It was a physical artifact, a treasure we worked hard to collect and even harder to preserve for the future. Do you remember the lost art of the unannounced visit? Today it is considered almost rude to show up at someone's front door without sending a text message first to ask for permission. But back then, an unexpected knock on the door was a joyous occasion, a completely normal part of everyday life. Neighbors, aunts, or old friends would simply drop by in the late afternoon to see how we were doing, and our mothers were never caught off guard. Even if the house was not perfectly tidy, hospitality was an absolute reflex. The moment guests sat on the sofa, out came the good crystal glasses and the silver tray. We would serve a glass of ice-cold water alongside a tiny glass plate holding a single, shining spoonful of gliko tukutaliu, a sweet fruit preserve made of sour cherry, fig, or bitter orange, proudly made by my mother the previous summer. The adults would sit in the living room, a room that was otherwise kept closed and pristine, meant only for guests. They would share their news, their worries and their joys, looking directly into each other's eyes, not at a screen. There was a beautiful spontaneity to human connection then. We lived with open doors and open hearts, welcoming the unexpected instead of fearing it as an intrusion on our schedules. Let us wake up early for a moment and remember the comforting clinking sound that broke the morning silence before the sun even fully rose. It was the neighborhood milkman making his daily rounds. Long before we had aisles of plastic jugs in massive supermarkets, milk was delivered directly to our doorsteps. The milkman would leave thick, heavy glass bottles filled with fresh, creamy milk right at our front door, taking away the empty bottles we had washed and left out the night before. Sometimes, in the colder months, the cream would rise and form a thick, delicious plug at the very top of the bottle, a treat we children would fight over. Our mothers would carefully pour the milk into a special aluminum pot to boil it on the stove, a crucial step to make it safe to drink. The smell of boiling milk would fill the kitchen, a warm, slightly sweet scent that meant it was time to wake up for school. We drank it warm, sometimes with a spoonful of cocoa powder or a piece of dry bread dipped into it. When you held that cold, wet glass bottle in your hands, you felt a direct connection to the people who produced your food. It was a simple, deeply rooted morning ritual that nourished us, relying on trust and a sense of community that has quietly vanished from our modern mornings. Now, Let us recall the absolute absurdity of trying to watch television in a time when broadcast signals were practically a matter of luck. In the 1970s, having a television set was a luxury, a large wooden box with a small, curved glass screen that only showed black and white images. We only had 2 national channels, and they did not even broadcast all day long. But the real adventure was getting a clear picture. Do you remember the family teamwork required to adjust the antenna on the roof? One person, usually the father, would climb up to the roof, bravely wrestling with the tall metal mast in the wind. Meanwhile, someone else had to stand on the balcony, acting as a human relay station, shouting down to a third person in the living room who was staring intensely at the screen. Turn it a little to the left. No, wait, too far, go back. Now we have snow. Wait, now it is ghosting. This chaotic shouting match could go on for 20 minutes, just so we could watch a grainy broadcast of the evening news or a beloved Greek comedy film. There was no remote control. You had to walk up to the television and turn a heavy plastic dial that made a loud clunking noise. We accepted this struggle as perfectly normal. It made the reward of finally watching a movie together feel like a hard-won victory. Let us step back outside into the neighborhood streets of a warm evening, where the sidewalks transformed into the living rooms of our grandmothers. Before air conditioning kept everyone locked indoors with their windows tightly shut, the summer heat drove people outside. The older women, dressed in simple, dark-colored cotton dresses, would carry their light, woven folding chairs out onto the pavement right outside their front doors. They did not just sit idle, their hands were always busy. I can still hear the satisfying snap of fresh green beans being broken, or the gentle rustling of lentils being sorted on a large round tin tray resting on their laps. As they worked, they acted as the ultimate neighborhood watch and the primary news network. They knew exactly who was coming and going, who was courting whom, and which child had misbehaved at school that morning. They would greet every passerby, offering a piece of advice or a sharp, loving critique. Sitting there, surrounded by the smell of jasmine and exhaust fumes, they were the anchors of our streets. For us children running past them, their presence was a guarantee of safety. They were our collective mothers, watching over the neighborhood until the evening dew settled and it was time to fold the chairs and go back inside. We must also talk about how we played, and more importantly, what we played with. The kids of today, with their digital tablets and overflowing toy boxes, would look at our childhood treasures with absolute confusion. We did not have money for expensive store-bought toys, so we became inventors. Do you remember the fierce competitions we had using simple metal bottle caps from glass soda bottles? We would carefully collect them, smash them completely flat with a heavy stone so they would glide perfectly, and sometimes even fill them with melted wax or clay to give them extra weight. We would draw long, winding tracks in the dirt or on the pavement using a piece of broken chalk or a soft rock and flick our flattened caps for hours, trying to knock our opponents out of bounds. We also played with colorful glass marbles, kneading in the dust, our hands filthy, aiming with one eye closed to hit the prized marble in the center of a hand-drawn circle. Our pockets were always heavy with these simple, worthless objects that meant the world to us. The joy we felt when we won a rare, glittering marble from a friend was immensely genuine. We built our own fun from the scraps of the world around us, proving that imagination and a patch of dirt were all we ever really needed to be completely happy. Let us remember the chaotic, dusty, and incredibly loud ritual of preparing the house for the changing of the seasons, specifically the beating of the carpets. Today, a robotic vacuum silently glides across the floor, but back then, cleaning the heavy winter rugs was an intense physical workout and a neighborhood spectacle. In the crisp days of late autumn, and again in the spring, the balconies of every apartment building would drape heavy, colorful, woven carpets over their metal railings. The air would fill with the sharp, rhythmic sounds of long, woven rattan beaters violently striking the thick fabric. Whack, whack, whack. The echoes bounced off the concrete walls of the narrow streets. You could see clouds of trapped dust billowing out into the sunlight with every single strike. It was a communal event. You would look across the street and see the neighbor hanging over her balcony, hair tied back in a scarf, violently beating her living room rug. and you would wave in solidarity. It was exhausting work, shaking out the grit of the city, but when those carpets were finally brought back inside, smelling of fresh air and winter sunshine, and laid perfectly flat on the freshly mopped mosaic floors, the entire house felt reborn. It was a sign that we were finally ready to face the long, cold winter nights. And speaking of seasons, do you remember the epic, exhausting journeys to our ancestral villages for the summer holidays? Long before the modern, multi-lane highways cut smoothly through the mountains, traveling out of the city was a grueling expedition. Families would pack into small, incredibly hot cars that did not have a trace of air conditioning. The windows were rolled all the way down, letting in the scorching summer wind and the smell of hot asphalt. We drove slowly over narrow, terrifyingly winding dirt roads that hugged the edges of steep cliffs, honking the horn before blind curves to warn oncoming buses. Inside the car, the space was cramped. We were surrounded by soft cloth bags filled with clothes, plastic containers of food for the journey, and sometimes even a live chicken or fresh produce brought from the city. The trip took hours, sometimes an entire day, to cover a distance that today takes just a couple of hours. We would stop by natural mountain springs to drink freezing cold water from cupped hands and let the overworked car engine cool down. Despite the motion sickness, the dust, and the heat, the moment we finally saw the village square and our grandparents waiting under the old plane tree, the exhaustion vanished. That difficult journey made arriving feel like a true, miraculous homecoming. Let us wander into the magical, fragrant darkness of the Therino cinema, the open-air summer cinema, a cornerstone of our youth. In an era without multiplexes or home streaming, watching a movie in the summer was a truly sensory experience. We would walk to the neighborhood cinema, where the walls were often just whitewashed fences covered in blooming jasmine and climbing honeysuckle. The smell of those flowers mixed perfectly with the salty aroma of freshly roasted sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds, the famous pasatempos, which we bought in small paper cones to crack between our teeth during the film. We sat on simple canvas director's chairs set on crushed white gravel, the stones crunching under our feet every time we shifted. We did not just watch the screen, we looked up at the deep, black, starry sky above us. Sometimes, a stray cat would casually wander across the stage, directly under the flickering screen, or the sound of a passing motorcycle would drown out the dialogue of the glamorous Greek movie stars. We laughed together, we cried together, surrounded by our neighbors in the cool night air. The magic was not in the flawless quality of the picture or the sound, but in sharing a beautiful collective dream under the open canopy of the summer sky. Now, let us recall a piece of clothing that instantly brings back the exact smell of chalk dust and old-school notebooks. The mandatory school uniform, specifically the blue smock with the white collar, known as the podia. For decades, every single student in the country wore the exact same outfit. The boys had simple blue tops, but the girls wore tailored blue dresses with crisp, meticulously ironed white collars. Today, kids wear designer sneakers and branded hoodies to class, expressing their individual style. But back then, the uniform stripped away our differences. You could not tell who was from a wealthy family and who was struggling just by looking at their clothes. We all carried those heavy, unyielding, rectangular leather satchels strapped to our backs, rubbing against the rough blue fabric of our smocks. Our mothers would spend Sunday evenings washing, heavily starching, and carefully ironing those uniforms, ensuring the white collars were perfectly pristine for Monday morning. We hated them at the time, complaining they were hot and restrictive, but looking back, that blue sea of students in the schoolyard gave us a profound sense of belonging. We were all in it together, equalized by a simple piece of blue cloth that defined our entire childhood. Let us listen closely to the echoes of the wandering street merchants, a vibrant symphony of commerce that brought life directly to our windowsills. Before you could order anything you needed with a single click on a computer, the marketplace came to you, announcing itself with loud, melodic shouting. Every morning, the streets would resonate with different calls. There was the man pushing a cart filled with fresh fruits and vegetables, shouting out the prices of his heavy red tomatoes and crisp watermelons. Then came the knife sharpener, peddling a strange contraption that spun a grinding wheel, calling out for dull scissors and rusty kitchen knives. I can still smell the burning metal as sparks flew onto the pavement. There was the chair caner, walking slowly with bundles of fresh straw on his back, ready to weave new seats for our worn-out wooden chairs right there on the sidewalk. And of course, the buyer of old things, calling out for broken appliances and old clothes, his voice trailing off at the end of the street. These men did not just sell services, they brought character and rhythm to our days. We knew their voices as well as we knew the voices of our own relatives. They wove a tapestry of sound that made the neighborhood feel alive, buzzing, and deeply interconnected. We must remember a very specific, sharp scent that instantly signals the arrival of winter in the memories of our generation. The overwhelming smell of mothballs, the naphthalini. In our homes, changing over the closets was a major multi-day operation. Our mothers would bring down the massive, heavy, brightly colored woolen blankets known as velences, which had been packed away tightly since spring. These blankets were incredibly heavy. They did not just keep you warm, they pinned you down to the mattress with their sheer weight. To protect these precious woolens from hungry moths, they were heavily dusted with white, strong-smelling mothballs before being stored in the top cupboards. When winter finally arrived and the temperatures dropped, pulling those blankets out meant the entire bedroom would smell of that sharp, chemical scent for at least a week. We would dive under the heavy wool, burying our noses in the scratchy fabric, feeling completely safe and secure despite the pungent odor. Today, houses are centrally heated, and we sleep under light, synthetic duvets that weigh almost nothing. But back then, the physical weight of that mothball-scented blanket was a comforting embrace, a sturdy shield against the cold winds howling outside our poorly insulated windows. Let us talk about the daily struggle for a simple luxury that modern kids take entirely for granted: hot water on demand. Today, you turn a handle and step into a steaming shower at any hour of the day. But in our youth, taking a hot bath required strategic planning and immense patience. Many older houses still relied on a wood-burning stove in the corner of the bathroom, where we had to light a fire and wait for the metal tank to heat up. Later, we upgraded to the magical electric boiler, the thermosifonas. But even that was a test of endurance. You had to flip the heavy red switch on the electrical panel and wait for at least an hour. We would constantly check the glowing orange indicator light or lightly touch the metal pipe to see if it was warm yet. And you could not take a long, relaxing shower. The hot water was strictly rationed. If you lingered too long, the water would turn freezing cold without warning, and the next family member waiting outside the door would be left shivering. We washed quickly, efficiently, and with immense gratitude for the warmth. That glowing red switch on the wall taught us not to waste our resources. It made us appreciate the simple comfort of warm water on our skin, turning a mundane daily routine into a small, highly anticipated reward. Finally, let us touch upon the most profound difference of all: the way we communicated with the people we loved who were far away. Today, a video call across the globe takes a second and costs nothing. But in the 1970s, Greece had witnessed a massive wave of emigration. Almost every family had an uncle, a brother, or a sister working in the factories of Germany or the diners of America. Our only real lifeline to them was the handwritten letter. Do you remember those incredibly thin, pale blue aerograms? The paper was so delicate you had to write gently with a ballpoint pen so you would not tear it. We would fold the letter itself to form the envelope, licking the edges to seal it tight. We poured our hearts onto that thin blue paper, sharing news of births, marriages, and neighborhood gossip in careful handwriting. And then, the agonizing wait began. It could take 2 weeks, sometimes a month, to get a reply. When the postman finally handed over a letter covered in foreign stamps, the entire household would gather around the kitchen table. The letter was read aloud, passed from hand to hand, smelled and touched, as if the paper itself held the warmth of the person who sent it. We did not have instant communication, but the words we shared were deeply considered, deeply felt, and cherished forever. As we look back at these 40 beautiful, absurd, and long-forgotten habits, we realize a profound truth. We do not actually miss the heavy woolen blankets, the grainy television screens, or the stinging red medicine on our scraped knees. What we truly miss is the texture of that time. We miss the slow pace of a summer afternoon, the unannounced visits, and the deep, unbroken connection we shared with our neighbors, our families, and our environment. We miss a world where things were fixed instead of thrown away, where we looked into each other's eyes instead of down at glowing screens, and where simple joys were enough to fill our hearts completely. Our youth was not defined by what we lacked in technology, but by what we possessed in community and sincerity. Thank you for taking this emotional journey back to the 1970s and 80s with me. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like to help preserve our history. And now, I want to ask you something deeply personal. Which of these vintage habits do you miss the most? Or what is a cherished childhood memory you hold dear? Please, write your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I cannot wait to share in your memories.